أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. The second questions for today are: how are you? How was your week? How did you learn and grow over the week or over the past month or over the past year? Think about that and how can we apply this to type of learning and growth? Because I'm building my way up to a particular end thing, right? So I'm gonna this is like, let's say, the next part in the sequence of things, right? The first one, when we were learning a little bit about how language works and so on, and we watched that TED talk on like how languages help shape the way we think about things. And last time we looked a little bit about motivation and so on, and what learning is and so on. So today we're going to continue talking about languages, and I'm trying to get to a point where you guys can see how everything that we do is just a type of language, essentially, and how you can use that to frame everything that you do, and then just find everything very easy and become experts in anything, essentially. Just understanding how things work, right, fundamentally. So the questions, I guess the new questions are the updated portions of this is: what is or how can we motivate ourselves? What is motivation? What is mindset? And how can we use this information to motivate ourselves? Today's topic is then a little bit more about motivation based on mindset. And we did talk about this a little bit last time, but today is a little bit more in depth. So think about what you can do in terms of your brain and your mindset to help you be motivated. And this obviously connects to this right here. So the how part of it is, there's a certain internal aspect in you. So think about that. And also, just a review over here, transformation. And remember the components of motivation. If you feel like you don't have autonomy in something, then it becomes a little bit overwhelming and you get demotivated. If you feel like you're not able to do it, you don't feel confident, you don't feel like you have the ability to do something, then you're also going to be less motivated to do it, right? So how does that connect with these questions over here, the mindset issue, and how does mindset impact motivation? And how does a simple change in perspective or mindset help motivate us potentially infinitely, right? Just endlessly, perpetually. And just kind of the discipline aspect that was discussed earlier about how you can evaluate yourself, take away emotions, right? And this is, if you look at number 2, it was also honest and raw. So just be very objective. Don't let your emotions get in the way. Just be really realistic about what's happening and stuff. And in this case, one thing to remember is when you're evaluating yourself, right? Being kind is not restricted to saying good things to yourself and saying like, it's okay or whatever and stuff, when you actually don't think it's okay. If you did something wrong, you need to accept that it's wrong, right? And you be objective. And being kind in this case would actually mean being truthful to yourself. So there's a broader the broader scope of what kindness is. And this also, if you want, this is a tangent. When it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when some people restrict the definition of kindness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala providing food to everyone and stuff, right? So that's a very restrictive definition. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is kind in a holistic perspective, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already provided everything for us. That He's not the one who's preventing the sun from coming up. He's not the one that's preventing things from growing and so on and stuff, right? It's not a supply issue. It's an issue of allocation, and that's what we have control over. So we are the ones responsible for that. So just something to keep in mind over there too. Just a tangent. Okay, and then we go to brain games. So somebody pick one.
the one on the right.
I'm here today to talk to you about overcoming the biggest obstacle you'll ever face. Let me take you on a journey. It was the middle of the night, almost a year ago. I struggled to breathe. Each step taking longer than the last, I fought my way upward at the cruising altitude of a commercial airliner. Focus, I thought. Keep pushing forward. The combination of 130 days of consecutive climbing, the negative 60-degree wind chill, and the actual physiological state of my body fighting back at 28,000 feet on Mount Everest summit ridge was pushing me to my breaking point. Get a hold of yourself, Colin. I desperately tried to regain control of my mind, but doubt, fear, and pain swirled in my thoughts. One step at a time, I thought. In an apparent daze, a chair appeared in the snow in front of me, blurring in and out of my vision. One step at a time, I thought. These labored steps reminded me of steps I had taken before, steps that had given me a new lease on life, steps that would bring me to my knees, yet simultaneously teach me life's greatest lesson. My mind flashed back. 10 years ago, I had just graduated from college. It was time to let loose, to see the world. I took my life savings from 3 summers painting houses, packed a backpack and a surfboard, and set off into the world for an adventure with no itinerary. After all, adventure is just bad planning, right? 3 months into the journey, I found myself on a beach in rural Thailand. It was a beautiful evening. I was watching fire dancers in amazement, and I decided to partake in the fun, jumping a flaming jump rope, because I was 22 years old and invincible. In an instant, my life changed. The rope wrapped around my legs and ignited my body completely on fire. Survival mode kicked in when I needed it most, and with one last breath and ounce of courage, I dove into the ocean a few steps away to extinguish the flames. Then darkness. Silence. I awoke in a one-room nursing station to look down, finding my body completely bandaged. What have I done, I thought. I had been severely burned. What must have been at least 24 hours later, I awoke, leaving a surgery room in a small ICU where there was a cat running across my chest and around my bed, hammering home the fact that I was far from home and in a dire set of circumstances. Being in this unsanitary hospital could kill me. And the pain, the searing pain was unimaginable. Yet the morphine they kept giving me made it feel like there was insects crawling over my skin. I couldn't tell which was worse. I just wanted to give up. I was downward spiraling fast, ready to quit. Thankfully, 5 days in this ordeal, my mother arrived to be my protector. I know now she was just as afraid as I was, but she chose to never show me her fear. Instead, she came into my hospital room every single day with a smile on her face and an air of positivity, daring me to dream about the future. She kept asking me questions like, Colin, what do you want to do when you get out of here? Let's set a goal. My immediate response, Mom, I'm screwed. The doctors say I may never walk again normally. What hope do I have? Life as I know it is over. But her positivity was unrelenting and infectious. And 3 days after she arrived, she was sitting on my bedside and I announced my goal. Mom, when I get out of here, I'm going to one day compete in a triathlon. Not something I'd ever done before, and looking down at my legs, it seemed rather unrealistic. But with a tear in her eyes, she nodded and wrapped me in her arms as only a mother can. It was many more weeks until I was released from that Thai hospital. I still hadn't taken a single step. I was carried on and off the plane and placed in a wheelchair when I got back here to Portland. The next morning, I was in my mother's kitchen, and my mom said to me, all right, Colin, now I know you've got this big triathlon goal, but today your goal is to take your first step. She then grabbed a chair from our kitchen table and placed it one step in front of my wheelchair. You need to figure out how to get out of your wheelchair and step into that chair. It took me 3 hours that day to work up the courage and strength to take that first step, but I did it. The next day, she had moved the chair 5 steps away, and the next day, 10. Each day, I could take a few more steps, until finally, after many weeks, I regained my ability to walk. And then one day, jog. Jogging felt like flying, but jogging was a far cry from running a triathlon. So for the next 18 months, I grinded with my goal in mind. And finally, a year and a half after my accident, it was time for me to take a shot at my dream. I showed up in Chicago to compete in the triathlon. I dove into Lake Michigan to swim the first mile. I got on my bike, rode 25 miles, put my shoes on, and ran 6.2 miles to the finish, crossing the finish line. I had done it. I had achieved my goal. And there was one more surprise in store for me that day. I hadn't just finished the race. I had won. Thank you. Placing first out of more than 4,000 other participants. The first thing I thought about were those months in the hospital, imagining what would have happened had my mom not forced me to look towards the future and set a measurable goal. Through this tragedy, I'd learned an invaluable lesson. I had learned that life will test us with setbacks, but these situations aren't permanent. We have full control of our choices to keep moving forwards one step at a time. I had learned that we all have reservoirs of untapped potential and can achieve great things. The biggest thing standing in our way? Our own minds. For the next 6 years, I competed as a professional triathlete in 25 countries. And then, in the fall of 2014, I found myself at the summit of Ecuador's third tallest mountain with a diamond ring in my pocket, asking my longtime girlfriend Jenna to marry me. I don't know if it was the lack of oxygen to her brain or the altitude, but she said yes. Awed and inspired by the mountains around us and wanting to set a goal larger than ourselves, we set a goal together. I would attempt to set a world record for the Explorers Grand Slam with the larger purpose of inspiring kids everywhere to dream big, to set goals, to live active, healthy lives. We coined our project Beyond 7-2. Now, the Explorers Grand Slam includes climbing the 7 summits, which is the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents, as well as completing expeditions to both the North and South Poles. Fewer than 50 people in history had ever completed the Grand Slam, and I would aim to be the fastest. It took over a year of hard work for both Jenna and I to put our dream into reality, but finally it was time for me to leave on the adventure. Jenna, ever steady at the helm of the expedition logistics and running our nonprofit, I set off for the mountains. First destination, Antarctica. A tiny little plane landed me onto the frozen continent. The landscape was desolate and surreal. It felt like standing inside the belly of a ping pong ball, white in all directions. And the cold. The cold was something I'd never experienced before. Average temperature, -40 degrees. It was so cold that I took a cup of boiling water and threw it into the air, and it immediately turned into ice. After battling these extreme conditions, for the next week, I arrived at the South Pole. And from there, the journey continued onwards. Next, I climbed Mount Vinson, then Aconcagua, then Kilimanjaro, and finally, after 100 days, I had completed 7 of the 9 expeditions to complete the Explorers Grand Slam, and I arrived at Mount Everest Base Camp. After 3 weeks on Mount Everest, I had slowly clawed my way up to the highest camp before the summit, Camp 4. The muscles in my legs felt like ice, cold and hard. My head was pounding, my eyes were bulging, my face was swollen. In any normal circumstance, this would warrant a trip to the doctors, but there were no doctors around. And besides, I knew exactly what was happening. I had read all the literature on Mount Everest, but nothing can truly prepare you for what is known as the death zone, above 26,000 feet, an altitude where the human body cannot survive for long. As darkness fell and the wind kicked up, I was exhausted and claustrophobic in my tent. I was scheduled to leave for the summit at midnight, and I was terrified. Doing the only thing I could think of to try to calm my mind down, I reached for my satellite phone and I called Jenna. And in an incredible moment of bravery, Jenna set aside her own justifiable fears and told me exactly what I needed to hear. She said, "Colin, people are going to summit Mount Everest tonight, and there's no reason you can't be one of them. Go inside your body and listen. Face your fears. I know you can do it." And with her words in tow, I set off for the summit, bringing us back full circle to where I began this talk. In the darkness, my headlamp only illuminated a few steps in front of me. Focus. One step at a time. I began counting my steps. 1, 2, 10 steps. Could have fooled me. Felt like 10 miles. I felt my body giving up. I was hopeful that the daylight might give me some strength after a long night of climbing, but the sunrise only illuminated the 2-mile drop-offs on either side of me. I was again being tested by the biggest obstacle of all, my mind. But this time I wasn't alone. Jenna's words filled my head. My mom's words filled my head. Remembering those labored steps after my accident filled my head. Strengthened by those thoughts, my mindset shifted and my body forgot its weakness. I felt a surge of energy, each step taking me closer to the summit. And after a few more hours of hard work, I gazed out on the most magnificent view from the top of the world. We got any Timbers fans out there? Of course, I had to bring a little hometown love with me up there with the timber scarf on the summit of Everest. After safely descending back down to Camp 4 and crawling into my tent, I reached for my phone again to call Jenna. "How are you feeling?" she said. "Whew, I'm exhausted, but I did it. No frostbite, no injuries, I'm good." She then said something I will never forget. She said, "Colin, I need you to put your boots back on." What? It had literally just taken me more than an hour to take my boots off and crawl back into my tent. She explained. She said she'd been doing some calculations back home, and it just so happened that if I get to the summit of Denali, my last mountain, in the next week, I can set not one, but 2 world records. She said, "I need you to put your boots back on now. Climb back down to base camp. There's a helicopter there that's going to take you to Kathmandu. There's not enough time for a hotel room or take a shower, but an evening flight will take you from Dubai to Seattle to Anchorage, and then you'll have about 3 days to climb Denali." In that moment, I could only laugh then, right? In that moment, I was forced to wipe the slate clean. And somehow, just 100 hours after standing on the summit of Mount Everest, we executed Jenna's plan, and I arrived at the base of Denali, my final mountain. The next 3 days were quite honestly the hardest of the entire project. I was battling extreme fatigue, and to make matters worse, Alaska dumped a huge windstorm on me. 50-mile-per-hour winds, minus 60-degree wind chills, making me battle and earn each step. But with one last step, on the evening of May 27, 2016, I arrived to the summit of Denali, setting 2 new world records for the Explorers Grand Slam of the 7th summit. Jenna and I together had accomplished our seemingly impossible goal. And even better, millions of kids were able to share in on the journey and the accomplishment with us, via social media, sharing with us their own goals and their own dreams for the future. I carry this rock with me every day. It's a small rock from the summit of Mount Everest. This rock stands for the moment I chose to keep pushing forward. This rock stands for my untapped potential. As I set new goals and ultimately encounter obstacles, this rock reminds me that even Mount Everest can be broken down to its smallest parts. A bunch of small rocks stacked on top of each other. Many steps leading to the summit. Maybe right now you're struggling in your own day-to-day life, feeling overwhelmed like it's just too much. Or maybe you have a great idea for a business you want to start or an innovation at your current job, but people keep telling you it's not possible. Or maybe you've been badly injured in an accident and you're not sure that you can recover from it. You see, tragedy and other great obstacles befall all of us. And in these moments, our minds are flooded with doubt. We ask ourselves questions like, should I give up? Is this even possible? Or why me? Leading us to a negative mindset. But we don't have to stay there. The only question that we have when facing great obstacles is, how will you respond? You have a choice. And when you shift your mindset towards the positive, you will quickly realize that there is a reservoir of untapped potential waiting to be released by you. Look, I'm just a regular guy from Portland, but I can confidently tell you this. Achievement is not for the select few. Achievement is simply for those who never quit. It is for those who set goals. It is for those who put the most steps in front of the others. Achievement is for those who can overcome the greatest obstacle of all, their mind. So set a goal. Take the first steps. The chair is right in front of you. And when your steps get you there, push the chair further. When you feel like giving up, put your boots back on. Let go of fear. Remember this story. And remember this rock. And watch as your rocks stack up to the summit of your Mount Everest. Thank you very much.
All right. Any thoughts on this? very motivational. Yeah. Yep. How does your mindset become an obstacle or a perpetual motivator for you? So before I continue, anybody have any reflections on that video? I know we got one in the chat. We'll just continue with this inshallah, then maybe you have reflections there, or maybe you're just allowed to take in and come to terms with.
Even though you can't see me, you know that I'm here talking to you. And I can probably persuade you that this container of water and this container of water have the same amount of water, which they do, even though they don't look like they do. And you'll see I left my anglerfish behind me. If someone were to move it without my knowing, you'd rightly expect me to look for it first where I originally left it. You can figure out all these things because you are far down the path of cognitive development. Your parents will be proud. But there was a time in your life, well, in all our lives, when simple concepts like these were totally baffling. Of course, lots of things influence how your mind and its relationship with the world grows over time. Both our genetics and our environment begin to affect our development long before we're even born, and they continue to influence our learning until the day we die. And even though we're born with nearly the same number of brain cells we'll ever have, our complete set of brain hardware takes years to solidify as our neural networks grow more complex. The study of our physical changes, cognitive, social, and emotional changes throughout our whole lives from prenatal to preteen to post-retirement is called developmental psychology. It's how we grow into who we are. And it begins with the growth of knowledge itself, the process by which you matured into the anglerfish tracking, water beaker estimating, peekaboo master that you are today. As we age, we tend to follow a sequence of changes in behavior and appearance called maturation. Everyone's affected differently by their personal experience, of course, but we all share inherent genetic growth tendencies. We roll over before we sit before we stand before we walk, and we walk before we break dance. The same thing applies to our cognitive development, how we learn to think, know, remember, and communicate. And if you're going to talk about cognitive development, you got to start with Jean Piaget, developmental psychologist extraordinaire. Piaget was from Switzerland, where he was kind of a wonderkind and got his PhD in zoology in 1918, began dabbling in Freud's psychoanalysis. After graduation, he headed to France to work on a method for testing children's aptitudes and abilities. While administering these tests, Piaget began to notice how younger kids kept giving wrong answers to certain questions. He became fascinated by the fact that children of a certain age consistently made particular mistakes that older kids and adults didn't. Like the younger kids would have a really hard time understanding that idea I just showed you, that this container has the same amount of water in it as this container, or that this row of coins has the same number as this row. While others might have dismissed these as childish mistakes, Piaget theorized that it was because humans go through specific stages of cognitive development and intellectual progression. His main game was asking, how does knowledge grow? He proposed that as we grow and struggle to make sense of our experiences, we create schemas, or mental frameworks that help interpret information. Schemas are like concepts ranging from physical things like birds and hats and eye patches to abstract ideas like friendship and betrayal. And we're constantly striving for cognitive equilibrium or harmony between our thought processes and our environments, which are always giving us new things to think about and adjust to. Piaget proposed that we adapt new experiences through two processes that are closely related: assimilation and accommodation. When we assimilate new experiences, we interpret them in terms of our existing schemas. So if a toddler has never seen a deer but has a schema for horse, she may call the first deer she sees a horsey. She wants to fit it within her understanding. But with more interactions in the world, our minds expand to accommodate or adjust to new experiences. So soon enough, that kid realizes that deer aren't just horses, and she adjusts her schema. From there, she'll be able to tell the difference between Bambi and Black Beauty in no time. But our knowledge base grows in ways that are much more complex than just those two steps, and Piaget knew that. He went on to devise a four-stage theory of cognitive development that described how we learn in different phases of our lives. He called stage 1 the sensory motor stage, which begins at birth and continues on to about age 2. This is the time when babies experience the world through their senses and actions, touching and grabbing and looking and hearing, and putting things in their mouth. From what I can tell, mostly just putting things in their mouth. Younger babies may get scared around strangers, seem to live only in the present, and have to see something to know it exists. This makes them very easy to trick, if you're into that. I mean, if you have any experience with babies, just think about this. Toss a blanket over a 6-month-old's pacifier and they think it vanished. They lack object permanence, the awareness that things still exist when they're out of sight. And yet, we develop so quickly that just a month or two later, that baby already understands better that objects and people don't disappear just because they're hidden. Object permanence, in Piaget's view, was one of the major achievements of the sensory motor stage. Piaget's phases of development is the pre-operational stage, and he believed it began 2 and carried on through age 6 or 7. The thing about kids at this age is that it's all about them. The pre-operational stage is marked by egocentrism, which drives most of what a child thinks and says. Kids have a hard time imagining another person's point of view, so much so that when I was a kid, if you asked me if I had a brother, I'd say, sure, John. But if you asked if John had a brother, I'd be like, I don't think so. Egocentrism, of course, never fully disappears, even in adults who understand how the whole sibling thing works. The pre-operational stage is also marked by a child's ability to mentally represent objects and events with words and images and pretend play using their imagination. They're big into animism now and believe their favorite bunny, Batman, or stuffed anglerfish has feelings and opinions and possibly the intent to kiss or kill you in your sleep, depending on how they're feeling. Still plenty of kinks to work out. Piaget suggested that early in this stage, kids don't yet understand the concept of conservation. Like how 500 milliliters is the same as 500 milliliters no matter what container it's in. They can also struggle with the notion of reversibility. It's hard for them to mentally reverse the process by which a ball of clay smashed flat can be rolled back into a ball. It's a concept that takes some time to understand. And these challenges both have to do with centration, a child's tendency to fixate on just one aspect of a problem or object, like the shape of the container or the clay. But during the second half,
Now, this is also something that adults have an issue with. And remember, I differentiated between emotions in the beginning. So emotions could be part of the process of, trying to achieve something, or it could be the result of not getting something, right? So just because it's emotion doesn't mean that it's the same in every context or every way and stuff, right? So in one aspect, it could be the process, and another one, it could be the end result itself. So emotion has different dynamics and so on. So just keep that in mind, that concepts have different aspects, but oftentimes whatever our interpretation, our understanding is, or our experience has been, we frame it with that. So if somebody is talking to you about a particular concept, you might be looking at it, you might be hearing it from whatever your experience is, and the other person might be talking about a different aspect of it. Just because we're using the same name doesn't mean we're talking about the same thing. So a lot of times disagreements take place where they're not actually disagreeing, two people are not actually disagreeing, but they're actually talking about two different aspects. So it's very important to kind of step back and try to figure out what aspect a person is talking about and what we're talking about. This is where you can ask questions and so on.
Stage 2, things begin to blossom. Kids start forming their theory of mind, or ability to understand other people's feelings, thoughts, and perceptions, as well as their own, and also how to predict behavior. Like, remember when my anglerfish got moved when I wasn't looking? A child at this stage will begin to realize that while she knows that the fish is in a new place, I don't know it was moved. So when I start to look for it, she'll expect me to look where it originally was and not where it was moved to. These new people skills have all kinds of awesome applications, from trying to convince your parents to get that extra cookie and stuff desperately need, to showing empathy, which is better, and offering comfort to others when they seem sad. Piaget called the third stage of development, beginning around age 6 or 7 and lasting until 11 or 12, the concrete operational stage. Kids are starting to think logically about concrete events that they've actually experienced. And unlike children in the earlier phase getting hung up on issues of centration, kids in this stage experience decentration and become able to see beyond just one aspect of an object or problem. So now, problems with reversibility and conservation just cease to be problems. And the last of Piaget's 4 stages is the formal operational stage, which starts about 12 and carries us through the rest of our lives. By now, our reasoning is expanding to include more abstract thinking, problem solving, and hypothetical questions. Now, Piaget's 4-stage model has been criticized for oversimplifying things and for being too rigid in how it classifies certain abilities by age. Today, for example, researchers have detected these phases at earlier ages than Piaget ever did, sometimes way earlier. Like, some types of object permanence have been observed in 3-month-olds. Psychologists also see development
development as more of a continuous process rather than a series of stepping stones. But even Piaget understood that his stages weren't as fixed as he made them sound. And he wasn't the only guy on the block talking about development. For instance, his contemporary, Belarusian psychologist Lev Vygotsky had some ideas of his own. While Piaget focused on how a kid's mind grows by interacting with the physical environment, Vygotsky emphasized how early development occurs through parental instruction and interaction with social environments. He believed less in set stages and more in the idea that caregiver adults provide a sort of scaffolding that helps children climb to higher levels of thinking and learning. Vygotsky put a lot of emphasis on language as a way of assigning meaning to things, and he also suggested that the ways kids develop might actually vary across cultures. In the end, there is room for lots of different theories here, but perhaps Piaget's greatest achievement was developing theoretical depth in the concept that kids actually think very differently than adults. This fact has helped a lot of parents and teachers, and his work spurred a new era of research in the field. While Piaget wasn't the only developmentalist or even the first, he's definitely one of the most influential and remains relevant to this day. As the brain and mind develop in children, so too do their social, emotional, and moral behavior. How a child is raised and cared for can have a profound impact on their personality later in life, which is something we'll look at next week. This week, though, you learned how we use schemas, assimilation, and accommodation to make sense of the world around us, and about Piaget's four-stage theory of cognitive development, including sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational periods, and about Vygotsky's theory of scaffolding. Thanks for watching, especially to all of our Subbable subscribers. You are the reason that we can do this. Thank you. If you would like to sponsor an episode of Crash Course or even be animated into an upcoming episode, just go to Subbable.com. This episode was written by Kathleen Yale.
So I want to focus on this aspect right here, the aspect of schema, assimilation, and accommodation. Think about it from the aspect of language. How do we attribute certain qualities and characteristics or names to specific things? For example, if I'm looking at a water bottle, I'm going to call it a bottle. And I have a certain understanding of what a bottle is. And if you bring me different types of bottles, I have that schema that I'm using to kind of attribute the same name to all of them. All of them I'm still going to call bottles, even if they have different shapes and so on. But there's a reason I'm doing that. So how does that impact our communication, for example? How does that interact our understanding of things? How can that limit it potentially, and what can we do to be conscious of that? That's some stuff I want you to think about as you guys explore this. In the meantime, if you have any thoughts and reflections for this particular video, or both, or any answers to these questions, or any thoughts on these, then go ahead and share them, inshallah.
I had some reflections on the first video. I liked the first video because he kind of outlined, well, for one, it was very motivational, but for another, he really kind of outlined a lot of situations where he could have had a lot of hopelessness, and like justifiably so. And because he actively chose not to, even though it did take some push from like his mom and then his like wife, and in other situations when he was like completely alone, he really did have to change his own mindset, like when he was in the higher altitudes of Mount Everest and everything. He was able to accomplish his goals simply on the basis of changing his own mindset. So I do think that was a really important reflection, even though that comes up a lot as we reflect on different videos and TED Talks and a lot of these videos that we're like learning from and talking about. It's very easy to say like mindset is everything, perspective is everything, but like in reality, like when you're actually in a super, super difficult situation, your mind kind of autopilots to giving up in a situation where it's incredibly hard to think of like how to get past that situation of difficulty without some really hard thinking, or unless you've already created a behavior of change where your autopilot is different or does otherwise. So I think that was interesting. So maybe like a good takeaway is in smaller aspects of life, not when you get into a super difficult situation, be it like illness or injury or a really big challenge and difficulty you're facing, like unexpected difficulty of some kind, when we have smaller difficulties where we have a greater sense of control, and if we start to shift our perspective on those difficult situations that are a little bit smaller, then you can kind of shift your autopilot mindset to react differently in situations later on when you are facing a harder situation. That was kind of what I was thinking about.
Okay, so taking it step by step in terms of training yourself, so going from the training wheels to eventually not needing those training wheels. And also one more thing to keep in mind over here is that ultimately somebody can be really motivating and they can be really inspiring and so on. And they can be encouraging you and they can be talking to you and they can be like putting all this like this hype around something, whatever. But ultimately you are the one who still decides whether you want to accept it or not. If you want to go forward or not, if you want to progress or not, right? So what are your thoughts on that? How can we motivate ourselves without needing someone else to motivate us? Because ultimately, we are the one who accept whether we want to be motivated or not. That's our choice. You could have also, when he called, he called with the satellite phone, and he could have also said, you know what, I can't do this. Yeah, I get you're trying to motivate me and stuff, but I just can't do it. But why did he accept it? And how? And again, that's him doing that. That's his choice. Meaning he's choosing to accept this information or these words that are coming in, this communication, right? So, what if you were motivating yourself like that? What if you were using the same words for yourself? How can you go from needing the training wheels to not needing those training wheels? And therefore being perpetually motivated.
I think it's always important to find, the big reason why. You have to find that why for yourself. You can have a goal, but to have that why is what really keeps you going, especially when you start to lose focus.
Yeah, that's very important. If you don't have the why, you don't know why you're doing it. You don't know why you're waking up in the morning and going to work. You don't know why you're waking up in the morning and going to school. You don't know why you're making those sacrifices for this thing or that person or whatever. Then you're not going to be able to sustain it. Yeah. Because when you carry that purpose with you, the externalities don't matter anymore because it's inside of you. It goes with you wherever you go.
And I think there's times when that's easier to have that why or to keep that why in focus. And then there's other times where it just seems so distant and it's not as easy to keep remembering why you're doing something. And then maybe that's when you need to take a step back and just double check and make sure that that is something that is worth your time or your effort. Like, is that really part of your goal? Is it really a step to your goal?
Yeah. And now I want you to reflect about this part a little bit deeper. So why could we have that overwhelming feeling? Why is it difficult in those times? What is making it difficult? That time when you get to a place where you're just like, it's really hard, like you just have to try to force yourself to like really like get, just keep going forward and stuff, right? Why did it become difficult in the first place? It is difficult, but let's step one step back, like you were saying. Why is it becoming difficult? And make sure how can we prevent that from happening? How can we not have it be difficult?
Right. And I think that, the answer to your question would vary, of course, based on whatever the situation is. So it's a good thing to ask yourself, like, why is it so hard? Is it hard just because it's hard, or is it hard because it's not you know, it's not something that I want to pursue or.
Is there like, I guess, some element of expectations we have of ourselves and others, and when you have specific expectations that aren't realistic and you have a hard time accepting that they aren't realistic, and situations basically just come back to prove you wrong, or your assumptions about things can make it challenging?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at over here. So maybe there are certain things that you didn't want to accept. Maybe there was a process that it was, you knew it was difficult. You knew that it's going to be like difficult, meaning it's going to be, you're going to have to put time and energy into it and stuff, right? And you could look at that expenditure, the expenditure of the time and energy, the use of all this, this strenuous activity, or like that, like this intensity in terms of like the stuff that you're doing, right? You could look at that and say that, man, I wish I didn't have to do it that way, right? Or you can say, wait, this is exactly how I get to wherever I want to get to. And so every time you do it, you actually start enjoying it, because you're like, it's getting me one step closer, one step at a time. So if we don't accept that, or if we would like to have a different way of getting to the same end result, and we just wish that there was another way, then we're going to start looking at this process in a negative way. We're going to feel like we're going to feel stressed out. We're going to feel like, I wish I didn't have to do this and stuff. I wish there was an easier way, right? Instead of living the moment and saying, wait a minute, this is exactly how I get to where I need to get to. Okay, let me get to where I get to, one step at a time. Every step that I take, every difficulty that I go through, it's one step closer to realizing my end goal, or my vision, or whatever it would have been. One step at a time. So then you enjoy the journey. You actually live the experience. You live the moment, and you're happy about it. Even if other people would have looked at it and said, hey, this is like a really negative thing, this is really bad, or they're really like, how in the world are you doing this and stuff, right? But how can we therefore, like, using this mindset, or thereby prevent burnouts? This mindset, having the right mindset, how can we eventually get to a point where we don't ever get frustrated or annoyed or overwhelmed or burnt out? That's what I'm focusing on over here. What is it that we're doing and we're not doing? What are we accepting, what we're not accepting, that's impacting us in terms of either being an obstacle or being a motivator, and essentially a perpetual motivator. So these are the things that I want you to kind of think about, because this applies to anything and everything in life. In fact, even going to Jannah, for example, we know it's a process, but if you enjoy the process, then you actually become happy and content through the process. You're not living life and saying, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make life so difficult? Why is everything haram? Why is this or that and stuff, right? But then you actually start seeing that, wait a minute, let me actually put things in perspective. Everything is not haram. Everything is not difficult and stuff. It's just, I make it difficult. For example, in the context of, is everything haram in Islam? This is like an application of this concept that I'm getting into. I guess if you want to call it a tangent, but it's an application of the concept. So, is everything haram in Islam? Well, how many choices did you make that you didn't want to make today, or that you were forced into making today? For example, when you chose to eat, when you sit down and choose to eat, are you sitting there and saying, man, this is the only thing I can eat? Or you're sitting there and saying, what should I eat, because there's so many options to pick from? Are we living life by looking at exceptions being the rules, or are we looking at the rules and understanding that they have exceptions, right? How are we looking at the world? If we're just fixated on the exceptions and we think this is reality and this is the norm and stuff, then maybe this can hold us back. Maybe this is us putting obstacles for ourselves. This is us boxing ourselves in our minds and stuff, right? So when they say think outside the box, think outside of the boundaries that you decided for yourself. You decided for yourself means they were arbitrary, essentially. They're not arbitrary in the sense that they relate to some experiences that you had, some thoughts that you have, certain things that you accepted as facts. and therefore bounded yourself therein, but they're not necessarily fixed in the sense that this is capital T truth. So how do we hold ourselves back? How are we eventually being being restrictive to ourselves? How are we bounding ourselves in boundaries that don't need to be there? And how can we break through them? And when we break through them, therefore, we don't feel stressed out or burnt out or overwhelmed or frustrated or annoyed or bothered or angry or anything, or sad or hurt. How do we do that? What are the things? This is the taking a step back and saying, wait, what am I doing? What are the things that are making me feel these negative feelings and stuff? Because feelings are the result, in this case, I'm talking about the other wave frame. So in this case, feelings are the result of rules that you have applied for yourself, the boundaries that you have set for yourself. Well, you can question them. Do I need to have these boundaries or not? Are these boundaries capital T truths in how the world works, or how I think the world works, or I want the world to work? Or somebody else thought the world works this way, so I'm accepting that, right? Even then, you're accepting somebody else's information or whatever they communicated to you, accepting that as facts and bounding yourselves permanently with those boundaries. But you can say, wait a minute, just because another person said it doesn't mean that they're necessarily true, that they're actually capital T truths. How do you evaluate yourself? To step back and say, wait, I don't need to assume this, or I don't need to accept this, I don't need to think this way. And then therefore just be happy forever. Why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran about the people who constantly remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They are the ones who have the most satisfaction and tranquility. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا تَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُم بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. These are the ones that remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their hearts find tuma'nina, tranquility, ultimate level of peace of mind, satisfaction, and so on, with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he confirms أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تُطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ, that definitely with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, two hearts find tuma'nina, that ultimate level of satisfaction and contentment. How can you become like that? How can you actually embody this verse in the Quran, that you feel happy and content and satisfied and so on? That's the question I want you to think about as it relates to communicating with ourselves. By the way, I want to challenge something over here. Not challenge, but I want you to think about something. Just because I am saying this, right? I am saying this information, whatever I'm saying, you're making a choice either to accept it or not to accept it. Just like that, you can make the same choice with regards to anything else that comes to you. You're choosing to accept something and not to accept something. You can question the basis of that acceptance. What is your rubric? What is your criteria to accept something and not to accept something? Just because it sounds impossible, therefore it must be impossible? Or just because it sounds impossible does not mean that it's impossible? What is it? Just because I don't understand how it could work, does that mean it's not possible or it doesn't work that way? Or maybe there's some testing I could do, and maybe I'll never know, and that's okay. So I'll give you an example, and then I'm done, inshallah. So one of the examples is that when I work with certain cases, sometimes I might have to go and interview multiple people or multiple stakeholders in a particular conflict or situation or something like that, right? And so I need to know whatever they think and stuff, so their perspective. So I go to them, I ask them questions, I take notes and so on, and I do that individually with all the people that are involved. Now, people on multiple sides might be saying that the other people or the other person is not the way that they might be lying, or they're twisting facts or whatever and stuff, right? But ultimately, I need to, as a mediator or as a conflict de-escalator, for example, or whatever it might be, right? Just listen to what they're saying, find any overlaps, and anything that I cannot verify or confirm, I'll just leave it up in the air, and that's okay. So a person, I might go in and say, okay, well, this is, I can't really confirm or deny whatever, this particular thing is, so I'm just going to leave it as it is, and it's okay. So I'll just not have any expectations attached to it. So for example, one of the people might say, for example, that the other person is doing this on purpose. Or they might ask me, what do you think about the other person or this other party or whatever and stuff, right? And I'd be like, well, I don't know. I'm still collecting information. I'm still collecting data. I don't have a conclusion yet. So I don't have a conclusion. I don't have a particular expectation or whatever and stuff. All I'm doing right now is I'm just collecting data, and I don't have an opinion on either way. So if a person is a nice person and they're intending good, well, that is one of the possibilities that could be. But I haven't accepted one of the possibilities as capital T truth, because I can't really know, right? So I'll just not give any opinion to it. I'll just be like, I don't need to deal with it. I mean, I don't need to focus on that. I need to fixate on this person must be telling me the truth, or this person is definitely lying, or this person is like intending evil in this conflict, in this situation, or whatever and stuff, right? I don't need to make those conclusions and stuff, because I cannot confirm or deny them. I don't need to bind myself to something that I cannot verify. Because if I do that, then I've accepted something that may potentially be wrong without actually having definitive guarantee that this is what it is like. This is that, out of all the possibilities, this is the correct possibility. It can be very daunting to some people, but if you accept it and you say, wait, I don't know, so I don't need to make an opinion about it. I don't know, so I don't need to have an assumption about it. I don't need to, hold myself or give myself a rule that I cannot justify or like actually prove 100%, right? I'll just leave it open-ended. I don't know. And that's okay. So that way, if any of those possibilities happen, I'm not frustrated. I'm not bothered by it, because I didn't have an expectation. I didn't have anything about it. Like, I just said, okay, well, yeah, that was one of the possibilities, and it happened. Okay. But if I had picked one of them, then I would have been upset if it didn't go the way I thought it would. And I planned everything according to that particular assumption that I made. So capital T truths are not assumptions that we're making. Those are lowercase t truths that we have. How do we differentiate between them? So I hope that made sense. And I'm going to stop over here, inshallah. If you have any comments or questions or further things you want to reflect on, questions, suggestions, feedback, anything. Okay, so if nobody has anything, then I will leave you with a question. While it is easier to assume certain things when the variables are many and you need to go, just make a move, is it required or necessary, or even for that matter, good and helpful and beneficial to make an assumption and fixate on that? It definitely simplifies things if we assume certain variables to be a certain way, right? But ultimately, fixating on that, is that a necessity? Is that something that we have to do? Because it looks like, and obviously I'm giving you like a guided question, but ultimately I want you to question that for yourself. If you are assuming something about somebody just because functionally it makes it easier for you, because then you're not stagnant, you're not thinking about all the possibilities and not knowing what to do, right? Sometimes you might make that call and you might say, okay, I need to make an assumption and move forward, and then I will accept the consequences if it didn't go based on those assumptions. But if you go in with that mindset, you're not going to be stressed out when something else happens, because you knew that was another possibility, and you knew that whatever you were doing was making an assumption and that's it. But what if a person uses an assumption and actually accepts it as a fact? So when you start doing that for, when you're in your own thinking, when you start thinking like that, when you start actually questioning your assumptions and understanding that you're making assumptions and not actually getting so fixated in terms of what you're expecting from your planning based on that assumption, then maybe that's going to help us not be overwhelmed or stressed out or burnt or upset or angry or sad or whatever. So how can you do that? And I want to leave you with this task, this homework assignment, and that is for you to start questioning your assumptions or questioning what you thought were truths, to be able to see if you can actually prove them, justify them 100%. As in, there is no doubt whatsoever. There is no other possibility that could have been, and every other possibility has been definitively refuted. It's very daunting because it's overwhelming, because you're going to be seeing like, okay, well then I don't know anything. But it's not about that. I'm not trying to make you overwhelmed. I'm just trying to say, maybe we can be kind to ourselves and accept that there are certain assumptions that we make just to be functional, but then we can accept the consequences of not knowing everything and making mistakes. I made a mistake. I thought this was how it's supposed to be. I planned according to that, but I knew also going into this that it could also be something else, but I needed to do something, so I did it, right? This is also where we make istikhara. We just go based on whatever our scope is, right? Or whatever our perspective is, or whatever our understanding is on a situation, and we make a decision. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala afterwards to, if it's good, then make it easy, and if it's not, to turn us away. So that's it. From our perspective, that's all we're required to do. And then we're required to adjust according to what we end up finding out. And that's what is easier when you come in with that mindset. So what are you doing? What are you holding as your capital T truths that are actually assumptions that you've told yourself are actually capital T truths? And how can you go back and let go of those assumptions, or accept at least that they're assumptions and not facts, so that you don't become thereafter stressed, overwhelmed, frustrated, sad, or whatever else negative feeling you might have. This is the homework assignment. And with that, inshallah, I'm gonna go ahead and close up. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.